So Jay, let's kick off the show here with some people that we should know. Who do you got in store for us here?
Well, we've talked a little bit about, and people in the U.S. know Kamiya and Sturman as the kind of the founders of the EEG feedback world, but we're missing out on a European, and the European is Niels Birbaumer. He was at Tübingen University, which is actually a major university center. They discovered circadian rhythms could be seen in research at Tübingen. But he actually interviewed Neil Miller in the very early 70s. So we kind of encountered him a bit when we talked about Neil Miller. But Tübingen University focused on slow cortical potentials, which is the physiological, neuroanatomical, neurophysiological basis for slow cortical potentials in infraslow EEG. And they worked with that to basically train people. First of all, they established the fact that you could control it volitionally. For a normal person, it takes about 4 hours of training to learn how to manipulate positive and negative. And it's level. It's not a wave that's necessarily ongoing. It's a level. And the level can go up in EEG land, so that's electronegative to turn on neural networks, and it can go electropositive to turn them off. And they basically utilize the electropositive turns off the network phenomenon to treat epilepsy. In the same time frame that Barry Sturman was doing SMR frequency training, they were doing infraslow, infralow without that name. It was slow cortical potentials. And the slow cortical potential is essentially the baseline that the EEG rides on. It can go electropositive or electronegative. And again, electronegative turns networks on, electropositive turns them off, and it's generated by glia. So it was a totally different piece of the EEG. They filtered out and threw away the oscillatory EEG that was focused on in the US, and we threw away the slow cortical potential, which was focused on in Europe. There's actually well-done efficacy level studies using slow cortical potentials in epilepsy. They've also got good work at the same level for ADD. They simply moved, after about 30 years of research at CZ for motor control for epilepsy, they moved forward and are doing it now on ADD. It's a totally different approach. And actually, to understand brain function, you have to integrate both the infraslow, infralow, slow cortical potential signal with the oscillatory EEG. Consciousness is the relationship between slow cortical potentials and gamma, which is an oscillatory EEG network property. If slow cortical potentials and networks are interacting, you basically have the basis for consciousness. When they decouple, you become less conscious or unconscious. And there's actually a metric used in surgeries, same-day surgeries, called the bispectral index, the BIS index. And the BIS index basically is a box with a number from 0 to 100. And they have one electrode. It's actually concentric electrodes. So it's more than one, but it's one big slab. They say put it on the forehead. It's not because the forehead is where consciousness emerges. It's a distributed network function, but it's a spot that doesn't have hair for most people. And for me, I'm getting a little bit more exposure. That they could get a few other spots with it if they did one. But the bispectral index at 100, you're wide awake and bushy-tailed and alert. And as you start to get less vigilant, the numbers drop down. If you're in the 80s, you're starting to get dozy. If you're in the 70s, you're probably falling asleep. But if you get into the 60s, that's about where they want to hover you. If you get below 50, you're too deep, and they'll probably have to wake you up after you've been in the hospital for a while, instead of same-day surgery where you can pop back and be able to go home. So they want to hover you deep enough so you don't move or experience the surgery, and they don't want to have you so deep that you have to spend the night. And to do that, same-day surgery, they've done millions and millions of surgeries. A decade ago, they had done over 9 million surgeries with this device. So it's ubiquitous. And the thing is, the anesthesiologist sees the box. They don't know what the box does inside. I've worked with a number of people that were anesthesiologist specialists in drug effects on EEG and all that, but they didn't know the secret formula inside the box. I will tell you the secret formula. They look at 0.38 hertz, and that's infraslow or infralow frequency, and they correlate that with gamma at 38 hertz, because the math is easy, 0.38 and 38. If they're related, if they're modulating somewhat together, you're conscious. To the extent that they decouple, you're unconscious. And then in the deep portion of that metric, they actually look for flattening, flat EEG, or burst suppression. And if you've got either of those, you're way too deep. You don't want to get to a 0 on this metric. That's a flat line. So the slow cortical potential is a critical piece of brain function. You don't really know brain function fully until you integrate the slow cortical potential and the oscillatory EEG. And again, gamma and infralow frequency or slow cortical potentials interacting is the biological basis of consciousness. So it's an important thing. And Niels Birbaumer was an academic. In the early 1970s, you could get a list of parts in a circuit board from him, the diagram of a circuit board, and also the code for a kind of a Pong-like game. And you could do what he was doing. He gave you the software and enough information that you could build your own DC amplifier. For about $100 and something bucks, you could have your own DC amplifier and the Pong-like software to train it. It was a rocket ship that would have a randomly selected trajectory coming from somewhere on the right-hand edge of the screen. It would slowly come across to the left-hand edge, and you had a window that you could slide up and down. It was electronegative, electropositive. You know, this is your slow cortical potential. And you simply move the window to where the rocket ship can go through it. And as you get better, they speed up the rocket ship. And, you know, it's like Pong, only you don't hit anything back. You just let something go through a window. And it was, you know, obviously very simplistic code, a little simple kind of a box with an arrow on the end of it for the rocket and a window. So as an academic, he literally would give you the hardware, software to be able to replicate what he was doing. Now, slow cortical potential first of all, he showed that it could be trained. And secondly, they applied it because you could turn off a seizure. They applied it to epilepsy. And again, published in Epilepsia, lots of high-level publications across a 30-year period. He retired, and, you know, so have I, you know. So we all get old. At some point, we want to put our feet up a little bit instead of run so hard. And he handed the lab off to Ute Strahl. And Ute's also now retired, a mandatory retirement at 65 in German academics. So she consulted until she was about 70, but she's retired now. And Ute also was a major contributor as a woman in the field. I hope that we do an entire show on the women in the field, but, you know, Pete, I know better than to talk about women without women there. So we'll have to wait until we actually get somebody on the show that can banter back and forth. And
Seaburn will be on next week.
Well, it'll be a perfect topic. And it isn't like we got to go hunting for women in the field. It's just, I don't think that they've been given an equal share of the PR. And it's a shame because there's some brilliant women. We'll talk about quite a few of them next week, hopefully. But today, obviously, Niels Birbaumer is like the topic of the person. And Niels, after he showed that you could control epilepsy, also realized that, we're using the brain to operate this software. How about if we do brain-computer interface and see if we can get somebody who's paralyzed and can't speak even to be able to use a voice synthesizer operating their brain to pick letters off of the screen. It's a P300 or a P3 speller. If you look at the letter that's on the screen, all the letters are on the screen, they'll flicker. And when one of the letters flickers and you're looking at it, they actually see your brain's reaction to that flicker. And they say, oh, he's looking at the Y. Oh, he's looking at the E. Oh, he's looking at the S. Yes. So you can literally spell and then speak. And it takes time. It's not the fastest typer, but if you're totally paralyzed and can't move, typing slowly, you got plenty of time to do it. But they ended up allowing somebody who's paralyzed to control delivery of water, changing the temperature in the room, selecting pre-typed sentences or phrases. The brain-computer interface was Birbaumer's baby. And the BCI was his lab. So all of the BCIA stuff you see nowadays is basically from his early work. Now, he worked with ALS patients and with total paralysis and reported results. He wasn't the best record keeper, or his students weren't. And there was a challenge to his publication. And he couldn't provide the paperwork and detail to validate the publication. And they actually suggested it was a fraudulent paper. Now, and it had to be pulled from the journal. And the journal basically said it was a fraudulent paper. It wasn't really, it was just a paperwork error. And the people who said he didn't really do it and it couldn't be done were in fact wrong. Since then, he's actually done an implant into an ALS patient's brain. And that was on the news fairly recently, showing that the person could literally think to speak, not pick letters off of a screen, but literally think of the word, speak the word. He did that with an implanted electrode, so there's higher resolution. Now, unlike Elon Musk, who thinks he's going to just stick those old electrodes in there and the AI is going to learn how you're intending to speak, this isn't how it works. With ALS, when you can't move anymore, there's a learned disability. You don't even try to move. And as such, the AI isn't going to learn how you move because you're not moving. Now, they had a monkey and they got the monkey to play Pong, and the monkey could play Pong with his brain. They learned what the monkey was doing. But if you're not able to do anything and you have a learned disability where you can't even intend anymore, if you have a stroke and you can't use the arm at all, the intention to move the arm isn't even there. There's that learned disability at that point. And you have to do the training before the learned disability, or you need to do biofeedback and have them learn the control. And that's what Birbaumer did with the implanted electrode. That you can't assume your AI is going to learn what the patient wants to do because the patient is no longer even got the intent. So you literally have to train them with neurofeedback. And at that point, they can learn what they need to be doing and operate the brain-computer interface at that point. So Niels was written up recently as a total success, beat Musk to the draw, which isn't that easy to do because obviously Musk is kind of rapid draw on all sorts of topics. But Birbaumer actually showed he was the real thing, and it wasn't some fraud that they had perpetrated. And everybody who was saying, and he sued to get his reputation back. Not after he did the successful BCI with an implant, but it was inappropriate for them to disparage him basically at that point. And he's trying to get his reputation back. In my book, he never lost his reputation. I did a big favor for Niels way a long time ago in Swansea, Wales. They had a meeting. The Society for Applied Neuroscience in Europe is their equivalent of like an ISNR or an APB as a European meeting. And it was in Swansea, Wales, and they had the dormitory. The society didn't have any money. They put up their keynote people in the dorm. And, you know, dorms, well, I vaguely remember dorms. They're noisy. People run up and down the hall at 2 a.m. when they get out of the bars. And I actually offered Niels a ride. I saw him walking, and it was about to rain, and I was driving back to the hotel I was in, a 5-star hotel down the road a mile or so. Now, this is in Wales. I'm, American. I'm driving on the wrong side of the road for me. He was foolish to get in the car with me in the first place, but he wanted to go see Dylan Thomas's museum. He was a big fan. I drove him to the museum, and he said, "Oh my God, the dorm's so awful." I said, "If I can get you a room in this 5-star hotel, will you take it?" And he said, "Could you? Would you?" And I said, "I'm gonna try." And he went to the museum, got a cab back to the meeting. At the meeting, I basically gave him a key to his hotel room, and it was a beautiful, gorgeous 5-star hotel room. So he said he owed me. And in 2005, I had him and his programmer, Sitaram, come over to the US to program the functional MRI feedback device in San Diego for Dr. Hubbard. And it was an applied fMRI for feedback. That was what it was built for. And you can buy a Siemens 3 Tesla scanner, but you can't get it programmed from Siemens. You've got to have that done professionally by somebody who knows how to do it, and very few do. Sitaram was the programmer who set that up for him. Anyway, we go way back, and he's an old friend. He's not well, but then most people my age aren't well, so it's not a surprise. But he's somebody that you should know about, somebody that we all need to honor as one of our founders.